A dark day in December of 1941 drove America into World War II. In short order, Admiral Ben Morrell recognized the challenges of fighting foreign wars and requested that construction battalions be formed to build the structures of war. On March 5, 1942, the Seabees became reality, and in every major conflict since, they played a critical yet often unseen role. Vetflix is proud to present SeabeeTV, stories from the U.S. Navy construction battalions.
All my family is prior military. My dad was U.S. Navy. My uncle's Navy, my other uncle's Navy, one uncle's in the Air Force. So military history was pretty relevant. And all my uncles and my dad served in Vietnam. So, and then I graduated, or I actually enlisted in the Navy the summer of my junior year going into senior year. Pretty much immediately following 9/11. I knew that I wanted to do something. I was just too young at the time. I remember September 11th happened. I was in 10th grade. I was actually in my Algebra 2 class when the World Trade Center had fell, and we all knew that we wanted to do something. And then I graduated May 20th, and I was on my way to boot camp July 7th.
I was mad. I was really angry. Mom turned into a different ball game once Dad was out of the picture, and it's you do the typical. You hate to be a cliche, but why did God take my dad from me? Why do the people pick on me? I'm a fairly intelligent cat. So I went to school, and I'm small. Everybody else I went to school with were, 6 feet and taller, and they rode bulls for the fun of it, right? So I was the smart kid that got into my books, and I studied, and I wanted to do well in school. So I got picked on for that a lot. I got bullied on a lot for that. And then after Dad died, Mom didn't really. I didn't have that male. Okay, this is what you do now when this happens. This is what you do when this happens. So I didn't have that. I didn't have that guidance anymore. So I was just kind of on my own. Got into drugs. Started doing the stupid stuff that kids do, and snapped at a guy one day. And next thing you know, you've got an assault charge and you're going to jail. And then you're too deep into the drugs and you don't realize it, and they kick you out of school. And I was expelled. I went to rehab. And then went to my grandparents' house, and they essentially rehabilitated me a bit and helped me, start to attempt to get my life back together. I just realized I had no direction. I mean, nothing. I didn't know what I was going to do the next day. And so, I said, okay, well, the military will at least get me out of here. I mean, initially it was just to get the start on life. It was just to get something going. I was literally walking down the street and saw the Navy recruiter's door and saw the Marines door, and I walked into the Marines door first because of my temperament. I figured that'd probably be a better way to go, and I told him, what I enjoyed doing. I grew up on a farm. I'd been running equipment my whole life, and he didn't have anything like that for me. So I said bye and walked across the hallway and told the Navy recruiter the same thing. He said, okay, you can be a Seabee. And I said, all right, what's a Seabee? And he said, you can be an equipment operator, and kind of gave me a brief description of the job. And I said, you win.
I really didn't know what to expect, but I was just going with it. I was committed to it, and I was like, all right, well, you're only gonna know what's gonna happen when you get there. There's nothing, you really can't prepare yourself mentally for it. Physically, you can do all the running and push-ups and sit-ups that you can possibly do, but for something like that, there's really no mental preparation you can do than maybe like have people you don't know yell at you for 12 hours a day for no reason. But other than that, there's just nothing. You just gotta take it with what it is. All the civiltries were out the window. It was do what you're told when you're told to do it. Don't ask why. Just get there. And it was just a complete. I was like, wow, what did I? As soon as I got there, you're in a line. everything you brought with you, you're told to drop and throw it away. Like, you brought, like, I had my book bag, you know, I brought a book to read, a couple other things, and they're like, everything in your hand, drop them. All right, and they wheeled a trash can by, and you had to throw everything away. And I was like, wow, I didn't expect that at all. And I was like, here I am in nothing but my well, now what we call it civilian clothes, but here am I in some shorts and a t-shirt. And then they're like, right face, and we march down, and you go through this pretty much assembly line of clothing. You go through your urinalysis right there and there, and I mean, that was awkward enough as it is. They just this red line like 2 feet from the wall, and you drop your trowel, do your thing. And what was funny about that is I looked over, and my book that I threw away was on this guy's desk, and I was like, that's my book. I was like, man, I want that book back. And of course, you know, let me get my book back, and that's not going to happen. Went through the process, did the urinalysis, and you go into this like assembly line of your initial issue of your what we call PT gear, or our Smurfs is what we called it, our Smurf uniform, which is our sweatpants, navy PT shirt, and hoodie, and tennis shoes and socks. And you just drop everything right there, and the guys that have been there a little bit longer are waiting to class up or giving you your initial issue, and you know, you just go to the next station, get that initial issue, and just keep going through. You get all the stuff in your sea bag now, and you're like, man, what is going? And it's like this, like you're just going through it. You don't even really have time to think about it. By the time you're done with it, you're sitting there in line, and then you're sitting on the floor waiting for your RDC, for your division, your assigned division. You're waiting for the RDC to come, you know, pretty much pick you up for school is what it felt like. You're like waiting in line, and you know, your parents come to get you. You walk off, and he like they just pretty much just separated from this point to this point. You guys are division whatever, and that point you're division this. So it's like, oh man, what division? I'm so excited, you know, what's it gonna be like? And then we get up and march off to our spaces, and it's at night, so you're like walking around like, I don't know where I'm at, what's going on, didn't know what to expect. I mean, it was really, it was exciting and terrifying at the same time. It was one of the greatest experiences probably of my life was the first couple of days of boot camp.
I didn't really know everything that I was getting into at first, right? So because you get to boot camp and you're just mixed up. I mean, back in those days, I know that for a couple of years they tried to put us into divisions, you know, in boot camp, and it didn't last that long. So I'm mixed up with all these cats that are, you know, going out on ships, and that are going to, you know, go fly planes, and that are going to go set in a hole in the ground and listen for stuff, right? And I'm like, I'm going to run I'm a construction guy. I don't even know what you guys are talking about, you know? And so for that whole 12 weeks, you're just lost. And then you get out of boot camp and you go to A school down at, you know, Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. And we get off the plane, and I'm with 4 other guys, and we're in our blues, and, you know, our hair's not, you know, like this, right? It's all kind of jacked up because they just send you on your way once you're done boot camp. I get off, and there's this guy, EO1 Joseph. He's now a senior chief running around. And he doesn't even speak to us. He just points at the van, and we just climb in the van, and we start driving off, and we're looking at each other, and we're like, what did we get ourselves into? You know what I mean? And we pull into the thing, and we get out, and we file into this little office, and he goes in, he's got the red rope on and all this stuff. And we're like, this guy. And he goes behind his office, and he puts his paper down, and he sits down, and we're still standing there. And this guy hasn't spoke. We've been in his presence for 45 minutes, and he hasn't even spoke to us yet. So we're lost. We're like, what are we doing? He sits down and looks at us and says, welcome to hell, gentlemen, and then gets up and leaves the office and leaves us standing there for an hour. And we're like, what? We don't know what to do. And then that was our introduction. I mean, you find out right off the bat, all that stuff you've been doing the last 2.5 months, that's garbage. That doesn't matter. This is welcome to your actual naval career, you know. You thought that they beat you up PT-wise in boot camp, and that stuff, that's for the children. Once you get to, well, this is how it was then. I mean, this was what, 2001, so June 2001. It was ridiculous. We would run 8-9 miles a day, and the same guy, he'd smoke a pack of cigarettes, and you would watch him in the morning. He'd be there at 4:30 smoking, and then he would run you 10 miles up and down in quarries in Missouri. We do something called the golf run, the golf course run. And some of the guys that come in now, they do the golf course, but they only do half of what we used to do. We'd go down in a quarry, then we'd climb out of it, and then run around the golf course over all the holes, and then come back, and then he would beat us for a half an hour. We would just do calisthenics, and then he'd laugh at all of us and smoke another cigarette and walk away, right, as we're, licking our wounds and bathing ourselves before we, go out. And then we'd get in a cattle car and we'd drive out, and there was phases. Like as you went through A school, you would start out with something easy, like a dump truck or something like that, learn how to operate a dump truck. You do that for a week, and then you'd go learn how to back up a tractor trailer without running over, somebody's car, and you do that for a week, and then you'd go, to a loader. Just you worked at, eventually you're doing, graders out there in the mud where it's raining, trying to grade out a road, and the thing sinks, and you're using a bulldozer, an old D7G that the controls are just ridiculous, and you're fighting it, and you're like, I have to be the worst operator ever on the face of the planet, but really it's just a piece of equipment. You don't realize that till later, and they do it on purpose, and they're sitting there laughing at you while you're trying to learn this, and they're like, oh, you'll be fine, you know what I mean? Stick around for a little while. And I mean, it was cool. I mean, you got through all that stuff, and then they taught you how to, do some surveying on your own. I mean, back then, they were still teaching us we could set up a tripod, we could set up a dumpy level. I knew how to read a filly. I mean, I still do. I mean, I can go out on job sites today. I don't even need an engineering aid, really. I can lay out most of my own stuff. I can do my own elevation shots. They were still teaching us that. A lot of the math on, okay, take that mountain and make it go away. To really, it's one of the things that I've learned in time is to be truly a good equipment operator, you need to have a geometrical mind. You need to look, in 3D. You need to be able to take that spot and say, okay, how do I take this and make it this, and that's what's cool. And when you see these kids come in now and you start to watch them in their minds, you'll be like, what do you want to do with that? And you'll see the gears start turning, and they'll say, okay, well, we could do this, and be like, it's going to fail probably, but give them the shot, right? It's dirt. You can fix it. You know what I mean?
Right now, I'm pretty much dual trained. I'm an electrician, and when I'm in the battalion, I'm more of a tactical mindset. So I do the convoy security team, and like weapons, explosives. All that stuff is what I live for. Like, I love it. The physical fitness of it, the marksmanship training, the gun trucks. The whole nine is it's just my thing. But at the same time, I've done humanitarian deployments where I was a crew leader, a project supervisor for the rehabilitation of several schools in Africa, and we're laying new wire, installing new fans, lights. The whole nine of schools. And at the same time, I'm doing this, and I'm running wire, installing outlets and everything like that, and I love that. So there's both aspects are just pretty much fulfilled everything I've wanted. I don't have any complaints over it, really. Everyone's going to have complaints over your job. Every now and then you're going to have a bad day, but for the most part, I couldn't complain about the actual job, which is pretty good, I think. Back, I was like, man, I want to do that again. Like, I loved it. It was great. Like, you cannot feel any better about yourself than doing something like that. You come in, you do the stateside, you're like, people here, like Habitat for Humanity, they rebuild homes for people, whatever. And you see it on me and my wife we watch Extreme Makeover Home Edition, whatever, and you see these, the whole town coming, you're like, oh man, how do they really feel like that? And then you go, like the battalion or detachment, we go over there and we do this, and exactly how they feel. Exactly, that's pure, I don't even know what to call it. It's amazing. It was awesome. We had over a dozen detachments throughout the Horn of Africa and all over the pretty much Africa in general. And I was on detachment to a little tiny island called Sao Tome, which is it's a prior Portuguese establishment. The Portuguese left about 30 years ago, and it's literally 10 minutes from the equator, and a little tiny island on the west coast. And we get there, and it's third world country. It's like you could tell it used to be nice, but then it just degraded. Like, no, there was no infrastructure. When the Portuguese left, from what we found out, is they took everything with them. They wanted their independence, so the Portuguese like, all right, have at it, here you go. And they just took everything with them and left. So they're just starting over pretty much, like a new government. I mean, for 30 years they've been trying to build back up, and here we are trying to, give them jump starts, a little boost, a little leg up, rehabbing schools, Coast Guard facilities and stuff like that. I mean, it was great. Probably the only thing downside of it was the smell. Like, you get there and it's just like, it hits you like a brick. And I'm like, oh my Lord, like how can you live? And they're just going around day to day. Like, you see people not using, like, they don't have a lot of running water. They don't have the toiletries and everything like that we're used to in civilization. And people would just relieve themselves right where they were at and didn't think anything of it. Like, it was cool. And I remember when we first saw that, we get off the plane and we're getting on our trucks or whatever, and we're seeing this. We're like, you've got to be kidding me. Like, this is accepted here. And then you realize, like, well, they don't have anything. Of course it's accepted here. There's nothing for them.
We were doing a joint logistics operations with the Army off of Red Beach down at Camp Pendleton. That's where we went out, and I was actually I was the last crew to set up the LCAS NL system. It's now the modular system. It's like a Lego set where you build it from the beach out. I don't know if you guys have ever heard about this before. The NL system, it was like a quarter-long mile of the steel pontoons. You take those sections and then you attach them all together, and they would put side-loadable warping tugs on the side, and they would come in. We would float them all the way from San Diego up the coast, and then they would come in hard charging as they could. We would take, this was, with the fib, we would take dozers and we would dig out a big slot ditch on the beach, and they would stab that big line of section into the beach, and then we would immediately take dozers and backfill over the end of it. And I was part of crane crew, so at the time we would take a 75-ton RT crane out on these sections that are just floating on the ocean, and we would chain it down to the sections and then lift these 70-foot to 20-foot pieces of steel pile up and jab them through a spud well that was stuck on the side of the thing. So the first crane pick I ever did, actually, I'm sitting in this crane, and I pick this thing up. I've got a 70-foot piece of pile hanging from my boom, right? And I hear one of the guys yelling, and I look down at him, because I'm watching my signalman. He's yelling over here. I look up, and there's a 10-foot swell coming in. It's got the face of Satan on it. Now I look down, I'm like, well, that's got to be bad. You know what I mean? That's not going to go well at all. And I didn't really know what to do, because the end of the pier, I was a few sections back, just disappeared. It just went away, and I went, oh my God, this is going to be a carnival ride. You know what I mean? So as it comes through, it comes up, and the crane, the whole thing shook, and the boom went the opposite way that the section went. So as it did this, my piece of pile actually stretched the wire and bounced off the section. So I went into frantic mode, and I pulled it up and swung really hard, and everybody kind of out of the way, and then I dropped it into the water to calm it down. So I saved it essentially from snapping off. But as soon as I got it in there, I locked everything down. I got out and I just smoked a cigarette and said, you got to give me a minute, because that was, you don't get to do stuff like that anymore. It was the second most dangerous job besides working on the aircraft carrier, the deck of the aircraft carrier at the time, and we were the last people to do it.
Left for Cuba. We got there in March. I think it was early March, and I remember it was probably 50 degrees in Washington when we left, and muggy and rainy, and we flew straight to Cuba. I got off the plane. It was not a cloud in the sky, probably 400 degrees, at least it felt like it was, and we had walked off the plane, and I remember I was already sweating from the time it took me to leave the entrance of the plane and walk down the catwalk, and I was like, this is a bad sign. This is hot. And I'm from South Florida, or Central Florida, and I knew what hot was. But I was like, man, it's March. This is ridiculous. I was like, well, I was not ready. And in Japan, the day we left was actually a blizzard. So I've been in snow for the last, X amount of months. And here I am in March in Cuba and sweating. I was like, this is a bad sign. This is horrible.
Then what? September 11, 2001, I'm on my way to work. And I get to Coronado Base, and there was just traffic. Just backed up down the Strand, and I was like, God, it's got to be a horrible accident. Something's got to have happened. You know what I mean? Because I'm listening to, just my music. I mean, nobody's really talking about anything. And it took me a half an hour to get onto base. When I finally got into my space, as I came in, I was like, what's going on? They had the TV playing. Everything, this is how quick bases shut down. I don't know if you guys have ever, it happened as soon as word spread out. They were locking gates down all over the country, all over the world. So that backup, the traffic backup had started like literally 10 minutes before I showed up. I mean, the first plane hit, and then, everything was, so word wasn't spreading yet. It wasn't getting out on the radio yet, things of that nature. So I come into my spaces and they've got it playing on the TV, and I remember sitting there for, 5 hours. I mean, nobody worked that day. We just sat down, and it wasn't real. You're like, this is not, there's no way that this is real, right? And you watched it all go down. I mean, we watched the towers fall. I remember sitting there with Theo on Argumento, and he was just crying. And, you look at him and you're like, what do we do? I mean, I was still young. I mean, I'd only been in, just right over 2 years. You're still figuring things out. And the last thing you ever expect when you join the military is you're going to go to war. I mean, really, believe it or not, you talk to a lot of people, they're like, no, I thought I'd come in and, do 4 or 5, and then I'd get out and go to college. You never really expect, I mean, the guys that go to the Marines, they expect to go to war. To become a Seabee, you expect, I'm going to go build stuff, It's blown all to hell. The section of the wall's missing.
They would kill you in a second if they get your hands on you.
I love what we do. I don't know what else to say about it.